Well, I think some of the things that I was talking about, have come to pass. I mean, China continued to grow, weathered the great financial crisis quite well, but I think what I didn't see, in fact, I don't think many people saw, was the problems in the developed countries, with respect to the distribution of the benefits of globalization and digital technology, and its probable contribution to rising sort of political and social polarization and fragmentation, rejection of established elites, including parties, nationalism, rising nationalism, all of that, and the resulting sort of divergence between sort of the way the economy runs and the way the politics are going has produced tensions that I didn't see coming. I did see, the rising importance of the emerging economies, the need for shifts in global governance, to take that into account. All of that seems to now be at a particularly tense moment, but I mean that you could see that coming, and I'm sure it could have been handled better, but it was almost inevitable that there were going to be tensions. The other thing I think that I thought some of the source of the current tensions, which are very different governance systems, say in China and the United States, but more broadly than that, we're going to produce tensions sort of as China got bigger and more powerful, had a big domestic market, which is an important source of economic power. And but I thought it would probably be handled better than it has been. And I think there have been mistakes made on both sides. The thing that really should have been obvious but wasn't, because it was early days. I mean, the mobile internet really arrived in the period right around 2004, 2005, grew explosively. The mobile payments, which now are an important feature of the digital part of the Chinese economy, that's all, a 10-year-old story. I mean, just phenomenal sort of growth. So certainly the speed wasn't anticipated. But one thing that's really difficult to deal with is that we probably should have known that the digital technologies were going to be important economically, maybe, create issues socially and politically, and maybe even internationally. But the other thing that's really complicating things is the digital technologies are an important aspect of national security and defense as well. And that's a completely different agenda, right? And so now I think we face the problem that the national security part is going to sort of get in the way of a reasonably open global economy, or we're going to find a way through international agreements of sort of immunizing the economic side, which benefits from cooperation and openness, from the national security side. But that won't happen unless there are treaties or agreements that nations enter into in which they sort of limit the use of digital technologies for certain purposes. And I don't know if that's feasible or not, but otherwise the national security agendas, of the major powers are going to sort of intersect the economic agenda in a non-productive way. Well, I think, what we're striving for here is a kind of balanced view. Or as Chen Long put it, we have immense opportunities, but daunting challenges. So it seems to me the way you position yourself in that is to look at the opportunities and make sure, the attitudes aren't too negative and one doesn't go overboard on the negative side in regulation and limiting the dynamic, innovative characteristics of the digital economy. But then, forthrightly address the challenges. So, and the challenges is getting to be a pretty long list, which is, I think, one of the reasons it's come to dominate. So you have privacy, data security, international affairs, national security issues, monopoly power. Are there going to be enough jobs, and are people going to have the skills to occupy them? When the digital when the economy becomes essentially built on a digital kind of foundation, or partly built on a digital foundation. Early childhood development, cognitive development, and it's bewildering, right? I think one of the challenges that is that to have a balanced view, you have to have a sense of, or develop a sense of where the benefits are going to come and whether they're going to be measurable. So we can actually say, look, I think in some areas, we don't have that much of a problem, but here's the problem in a nutshell. People are making a great, fuss about the digital revolution, and growth and productivity is going down pretty much everywhere. Mm-hmm. So what's going on?
Yeah, it's also the case in China.
In China. And so that's point one. Point two is we have this terrible habit of acknowledging that human welfare is not a single-dimensional thing. There's health, there's sustainability, there's fairness, there's material well-being, which we tend to capture in
also cultural elements.
And cultural elements and so on. And so, people have very strong desires to communicate, to socialize, to stay in touch with people, etc. So, and digital is going to affect all of these things, but the problem we have is we keep falling back on the standard economic measures, and they're not capturing the benefits. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow. So there's first, I think, but the first step is acknowledging that a lot of the benefits are not going to ever, not with a lag, just never show up in standard national income accounting measures. So there'll be transformative effects probably in healthcare, for example. And to some extent there already are those effects. You can see them. I had surgery last year. It was back surgery, so they're mucking around near my spine. I walked in the morning at 8:30, had the surgery at 11, and walked out of the hospital at 4:30. Now, that's literally impossible, even 10 years ago. Why? Basically because of digital technology, because they, put a little tiny hole, put stuff in, and they have all this imaging software that they can see, technology, so they can actually see what they're doing in there without ever actually going in, except with these tiny little devices. Perfect example, it seems. Doctors will have digital assistants that help them find the right literature they have to read. The literature's so vast, no doctor can keep up. But the digital technologies will be superhuman in their ability to read and find the stuff that you need. The imaging technology it's probably, the imaging technology is probably the most important general purpose, super general purpose technology. You know what I mean? General purpose means it has applications all over the place and not just in a single sector. And so that'll, and so what's going to happen is you're going to get very big increases in quality, but the cost characteristics of these technologies are moderate to high fixed costs and extremely low to almost negligible variable costs in software and replication and data and, in all kinds of things. So it's not going to show up in costs, and it's not going to show up in sort of market transactions. It's going to show up in quality, which we don't measure well, right? And that story gets repeated over and over again. There's one other thing, and then again, I'm going to do this one too, which is these other dimensions really matter. So 2 kids at Stanford, young, researchers, decided that you could use the imaging technology to detect skin cancers. So they went to the dermatologist, distinguished group at Stanford Hospital Medical School, and they said, you want to give this a try? And they said, sure. So they worked very hard and assembled several tens of thousands of images, the training data set for the modern version of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And they trained the algorithms and tested them, and it worked pretty well, right? So then you say, okay, so now what have we done? Well, we did something that's kind of cute, technologically, but if you ask the question, well, so, but practically speaking, you know, when you're living in Los Angeles, your daughter's living in Los Angeles, or I'm living in New York or Milan, I'm not going to go to the dermatologist if I think I'm a kind of risky type in this respect. The answer is no, right? So people have this habit of sort of saying, well, you know, if we don't beat the human beings, you know, with the digital technology, you know, then we're not there yet, right? Well, it's not true, right? So what I say to people when we're talking about this is I say, so if you live in, you know, London or Shanghai or wherever, you'll go to the dermatologist. The dermatologist is not going to get put out of business because they actually have to take the thing out and biopsy it, right? So we haven't written them out of the script. All we got is an engine that's pretty good at recognizing that there might be a problem. So from your point of view, if you lived in these cities, maybe you think nothing important's happened from the practical standpoint. But I said,
but in the remote areas,
yes,
in the developing
exactly.
countries, in Africa, yes.
Yeah, so I say, but maybe 80% of the world's population doesn't live near a dermatologist. And this thing in your pocket that you think is a phone, and an internet device has a camera. And then they get it, right? And the whole benefit is inclusion. And the general point is, when you're thinking about the practical implications of this, you have to think about the question, as compared with what, okay? So if you evaluate this as compared with a top-flight dermatologist, then you say, well, it was interesting science and technology, but it isn't terribly important. If you say as compared with nothing, you know, in initial scanning, then it starts to sound pretty important, right? So that's the sense in which I think it's going to take some work to bring the benefits into focus and balance them against the challenges in terms of work and skills and, you know, structural transitions and other things. Well, the most important thing is, you know, is kind of openness and exchange. So we have it at several dimensions now, and we might lose it. So one that's never been really touched is the upstream part of research, which is usually funded by governments and usually conducted by, you know, academics, universities and whatnot, has always been an open global system, right? For good reason. They're supposed to be public goods. You're not supposed to have scientists in Beijing inventing stuff at the same time, you know, not inventing, but discovering stuff at the same time that the same people are doing it, you know, in Los Angeles, right? They're supposed to, this one does this one, the other people read about it, and then they make a contribution building on that. It's a building operation, right? Now, if the national security agenda gets serious enough and they start cutting off this kind of exchange, which I think is very hard to do, that would be one problem. So that's an area where you ought to agree, we're not going to do that, right? Medical science, biomedical science benefits mankind. It should be shared and shared instantly once it's produced without respect to boundaries, is my position. It's the world we've lived in up till now. It's the world we should live in, you know, for the indefinite future. So that's one area. The second thing is, I think, you know, when it comes to technology, you know, the kind of stuff that gets commercialized and put in place and affects economies, I think, you know, what you need again is openness. You need a kind of best practices, and then you need some stuff that has to do with intellectual property and respect for it. It may not be the lion's share of the problem. I mean, I often say to people, the first real discovery of the importance of digital technology in building online marketplaces was eBay, I think. Well, you know, then we had a whole bunch of people, you know, who developed online marketplaces, Amazon, Alibaba, Mercado Libre in Latin America, etc. And now there's hundreds of them, not all of them as big as those, you know, mega platforms. But you didn't have to steal anything to do that. All you had to do is notice that somebody thought it up, right? We can't keep that a secret, right? I mean, so I think, I guess what I'm getting at is you know, there's going to be real innovation in multiple places, and what we want to do is share it and use best practices. And we want a system that's open enough to do it. And that may take some real work in this environment. So, you know, I think that there's real innovation in the e-commerce, you know, mobile payments, financial technology here in China, among other areas. Important innovation, and it should be replicated with suitable adaptations in other parts of the world.